Well, hello everybody. This is going to be about a day late. I didn't realize until last night that it was December 7th, and of course that is a date that will live in infamy, as Roosevelt said. And in the past, I've talked a lot about Pearl Harbor. I think that if revisionist history has a place, its biggest place is in regards to World War II. Not necessarily the conspiracy theories that kind of surround Pearl Harbor that revolve around whether or not the U.S. government had foreknowledge or the degree of foreknowledge they had. I think that's all interesting. Some of the arguments for that are compelling, if not necessarily proof. Um, there's also the whole angle that Ivan the Heathen has made me aware of, and he's done great videos about, and that's kind of what prompted this. I saw him post on his Facebook feed about this, that there was a widespread conception within the United States that the attack on Pearl Harbor um, involved German military forces and that it was a joint German-Japanese operation, and that the war that was declared on Germany was a result of this false belief, less than a speech that Hitler gave that is sometimes attributed as being a declaration of war against the United States and sometimes not. There's a lot of debate about that. I have read that speech. It is debatable whether it was a declaration of war or not. What's not debatable, apparently, is that in the course of the war, most people believe that the reason the United States went to war with Germany was because of their involvement in Pearl Harbor, not because of a speech Hitler gave on, I believe, the 8th. I could be wrong about that. I don't want to have to rehash all that. That's a huge topic in and of itself, and not that I won't ever go back to it, but I haven't really learned that much new about World War One. I've been doing a lot of reading about, excuse me, I haven't learned that much more about World War Two. I have been doing a great deal of reading about World War One. I've read now 2 books, taking different approaches to explaining what caused the war. One from the Russian point of view, basically, or not from the point of view, but blaming the Russians, and another that is actually blaming it more on the arms race between Germany and Great Britain, namely the arms race in the naval industry. Uh, I probably will do a video about that shortly, but I don't want to talk about it like that. I want to talk in line with a great series called the Cost of War series that was put out by a guy named John Dennison. I believe he wrote a book about it. He's associated with the Mises Institute. I don't know precisely in what capacity. He's published a few books. I haven't read any of them. You can find some of his lectures, though, on YouTube. Just type Cost of War. They're also on the Mises page. And these are excellent presentations that go back a long time. And you know, whatever we want to say about conspiracy theories and all that, the fact is that most people who advocate war, either current wars or past wars, and this is so common when we were talking about government policies, are simply discounting or ignoring the costs. And I had a really nice discussion yesterday. I met somebody and who was not a libertarian, and I think I was able to actually get through to him pretty well. There's a cost. Like when you have a government policy, say to, um, you know, well, like to have police. The price of having a monopoly on force is you're going to have police who have less disincentive to do something wrong, and so maybe you can argue that like it's necessary or we have to have it, but don't ignore the fact that then what you're going to have is you're going to have these Eric Gardner situations and these Ferguson situations or whatever. The details of those particular cases are they're important to those particular cases. They're not necessarily generally important, but they do illustrate, or at least potentially could illustrate, if that part of the price, part of the cost of having police protection is police brutality or overreach. They're incentivized or to do bad things, and part of the price of say regulation is that you're going to have less competition, and so you're going to have higher prices and lower quality, and they're also going to have the high risk that the regulatory apparatus is going to be used to the advantage of particular market actors and not necessarily for the common good. And you can't just say that, or the FDA. The FDA banning drugs, I think, is probably the biggest single example if we're talking about the U.S. federal government. Sure, the FDA banning drugs or restricting making it very difficult to introduce drugs in the market is going to reduce the number of people who die of complications from those drugs. Absolutely it will. It's also going to reduce the number of people who are saved because of those drugs' availability, which is now retarded or prevented. And if you're going to advocate the FDA, it's very good that you, at the very least, make an attempt to incorporate that. And the thing is, the advocates of government intervention, at least in their rhetoric, and even when you cross-examine them, don't consider these costs. These are things that don't enter into their mind, and so they're saying this is a good thing, and they look at it like an FDA regulation as the only result that has is to protect people. It has no result of causing pain and suffering and indeed death by preventing people from getting medicines that could help them. So I think war is another one of those things. Now, it's a cliche that war is hell and it kills people, but I think that people forget how long-lasting and deep the scars of war can be now, which is not to say that war is entirely a hellish experience for everybody all the time. There's all these things about, war is mostly boring. It's, you don't do a lot of stuff, which, by the way, it's itself, just that aspect of it is enormously wasteful, both of your time and of money and resources. Instead of working in a job or in a field, you're in a barracks or whatever else. But that's not so terrible. And then not everybody who ever sees combat is destroyed. There are plenty of people who it's a less dramatic experience than that, and not entirely a wholly negative one. I know people who have, and this is ignoring moral considerations here, like that they've done well, it was a good experience for them. Those people exist, and it would be wrong to have a picture of war that doesn't include them, but it does include a huge wastage of humanity, both on the part of the soldiers and on the people that they're fighting. And this is something that you can see in the statistics. It's a number that you know about, but sometimes it gets a little bit more personal than that. Now, I'm not I'm not a veteran. I've never been in the military. I don't think past a very young age that I ever really considered it, and even then, never that seriously. Everyone fantasizes about being a soldier at some point, but by the time I got to high school, I think the odds that I would ever seriously consider it were quite low. But that's not to say I haven't had friends. It's not to say that I haven't had even close friends who did. And over the course of my life, I've encountered people who did. And this is kind of being inspired by a recent episode that I had with somebody that I know. And this is not somebody that I knew growing up or from my home area. It's somebody I got to know remotely that I've never met. It doesn't matter what the details are, but this person contacted me not via YouTube, not through politics, but through, it doesn't matter, but like we struck up a dialogue about a year ago and became something of confidants with each other. We talked about our problems, about our lives, what we liked, what we looked forward to, our hopes, our dreams, that kind of thing. And this guy is a veteran. At the time, he was still in the service, although he wasn't deployed any longer. He's almost 40 now. He's in his late 30s, and he's been in the military for a very long time. He was in the Navy first, and then, like what happens to so many people who were enlisted, when they come back to society, they have a very difficult time kind of transitioning back into society, and what's not uncommon at all is they end up joining the service again. He ended up joining the Army, and he was deployed multiple times that I am aware of to both Iraq and Afghanistan, and he had experiences that he won't detail to me, but he was physically injured and he was mentally injured. As far as I can tell, pretty severely. I know that his body's covered in scars. I know that the damage to his body was immense. When he returned to the U.S., he was given treatment by the VA, and they treated him poorly. They gave him the wrong operation. Apparently, they operated on the wrong vertebrae, which almost paralyzed him. There was a period about a year ago that when I would talk to him, he could not walk. He was almost wheelchair bound. He could kind of walk. It was painful for him to shift in his seat. We would talk on video, and it was that kind of stuff. he found out later that actually he had been discharged for medical reasons about halfway through his tour of duty because he had sustained massive injuries. While he was in hospital, apparently drugged up on morphine or whatever, they convinced him to waive his. I don't even know how this is possible, but apparently his commanding officer, it would look bad to have so many soldiers go home for medical discharges, and so he connived to have him basically sign this away while he was doped up, which he did, which he didn't even realize it happened until much later. He since has kind of backtracked his paper trail to see about his history, and part of it, you know, he didn't remember was this whole episode. So this guy was completely fucked by the VA. But in addition to his physical ailments, which are considerable, considerable to the point of being debilitating, without a great deal of prospect of them getting improved, or at least much improved. You know, we talked about this, and it sounds like there's a chance it could be fixed to a point, but it's not a great chance. And it's just this person's life, their body has been, you know, really heavily damaged, if not completely destroyed. And the psychological effects are even worse. I forget what he said, but it was his type of PTSD, but it's a particularly strong type. And basically he says that he can't be in a room with multiple people for more than a few minutes without having extremely violent, not homicidal or anything, but just a reaction that makes it almost impossible for him to function. And you know, when I talk to him, you know, this is not somebody that I talk to on a daily basis, but kind of in fits and spurts, where we might have a couple good conversations over the course of a week, and then we might not speak again for a few months. And you know, last time we had chatted with, again, probably sometime in the late winter, early spring, in February, March, something like that. And you know, he was talking how about 10% was his claim, and I've heard this otherwhere, so it seems plausible. 10% of combat veterans end up homeless within 4 years of their last engagement. So if you participated in combat, about 4 years after your last engagement, regardless of when your service ends, about 10% of those people become homeless. And it's not hard to see when you look at, and the word that I used, and he said it was appropriate, was alienation. They come back, and because of their experiences, they don't fit back into society. It's just they are damaged in a way that makes it very difficult for them to reintegrate into society. Now, the military takes people out of society, and it conditions them to be, you know, obedient soldiers who are going to be potentially, not always, but potentially subjected to horrible physical and emotional trauma. And the fact that them doing that and then actually subjecting them to that trauma is, even if they survive, going to cause probably irreparable damage, sometimes severe irreparable damage, is something that the military really does not care about. It's not something that they're unaware of. There's no way they're not aware of. This isn't some secret. They're more aware of it than the average American. But they don't care. It's irrelevant as far as the military is concerned. And so now they don't tell the 19-year-olds and the 18-year-olds that they woo with all these ridiculous fictions about, you know, you see the animations where they go and they do something really exciting, like, you know, rappel out of a helicopter or whatever, mountain climb, rock climb. You know, the videos never really show killing, and which, you know, they don't always kill, so like it's not necessarily that misleading in that respect. But then it shows them like transitioning always into becoming like a doctor or a computer programmer, whatever, you know, like you just leave the military and just walk into some great job. And, you know, it's not like that never has happened, so that's not impossible. But, you know, it's not impossible for somebody to drop out of school and become a millionaire either. It just doesn't happen very often. And if that's what you're selling, it's a little bit disingenuous. But the thing is, a kid in high school, which is mostly who this is targeted at, is not going to know all that. It's not going to typically be able to see through all that. And it just seems like this big, exciting thing. And now, this guy's experience, whose story I'm relating here, and I'm not done with it, by the way, but I'm me, and I'm going to tangent here. Like a lot of the friends that I knew personally, and these friends range from people who are fairly close to people who are more of acquaintance than a friend, but you know who they are, you know the same people. Um, you know, their experiences, even though I know some of them had traumatic ones, they they weren't the damage they received wasn't as severe as this guy's. Um, they did receive injuries, mental and physical. They do have problems. They have nightmares. They pace. Um, they have this very different social circle. I remember very distinctly going to meet one of my friends, hanging out in his garage. You know, very barbecue, campfire. You know, very laid back, informal kind of environment. You know, and his phone would ring, and it'd be one of his army buddies, and they'd get on and start chatting. And oh, did you hear so and so? Yeah, he killed himself. Killed himself. He committed suicide. Now, for you or me or anyone else, you know, a peer or somebody committing suicide would be a major, you know, aberrant event. But for these guys, it's like, oh yeah, he committed suicide. Not that they're flippant about it, not that they don't care, but it's almost a mundane experience. And but what's more than that is they come back and they left when they're 18, 19, 20. They come back and they're 23, 24, 25, and it's not like everyone fits this mold, but you get the picture. And all their friends from high school are either got jobs and are now, you know, in mid management, or they got better jobs. You know, they worked at the fast food restaurant for a while, and maybe they got a better job, you know, managing a gas station or whatever else, or they went to college and they're, uh, you know, whatever overrated things about college, but they're done with college or near done with college. They've got a degree. Maybe they picked up a spouse or whatever else. And these guys come back, they get off the ship, and they don't get handed a lab coat to go work, you know, at Microsoft. They end up going back to the same job that they left in high school, at the gas station or at Burger King or at the movie theater or whatever it was. And only now they're 4 years behind, and they've got all this extra baggage. You know, the money that is touted, it sounds like a lot. You know, you hear all these $60,000, $80,000, but when you do the division for the number of years that you're there, and the fact that the time commitment that the government demands, and the fact that it's essentially a slave contract, it's very difficult to get out of. You can't quit it like a normal job. The potential number of hours that you're required. You know, the pay is shit. It's worse than minimum wage, basically, uh, with the added fact that you could be killed or destroyed or maimed, which is not very likely if you're working at most any other job. Uh, and jobs, by the way, that are risky, there are jobs that are highly risky, have really high remuneration. So, like, working in the oil field can be very risky. You can die in the oil field. And you know what? You get paid a lot of money. You can get wealthy as just a regular worker in the oil field. You can't get wealthy being a regular worker in the army. You know, which isn't to say you can't derive some benefits from it. You know, what did Romans say? You know, the military turns people into turns lemons into lemonade, and your job is to make the army squeeze for you or something. I don't remember. Like, it's a bureaucracy. And it can be gamed. There are ways to make it work to your advantage, but most people don't. And as a rule, most people can't. So, you know, with most of my friends, they come back and they're very alienated from society. Now, they're not so alienated, most of the ones I know, that they can't go back and get a job. They can't still hang out with their friends, but they don't thrive. And a lot of them feel the only place that they really belong now is to go back to the military, which many of them have done. And that's what their career is going to be, is in the military as a bureaucrat in a job, you know, where the ability to promote yourself is limited. It comes at a high price, and the remuneration is not that great. Um, and it's just a very mundane kind of thing, which isn't necessarily terrible. Lots of people lead mundane existences, but like, it's not at all the glamour that's sold. Now, my friend, this one who contacted me, he was, when we talked to him about 6 months ago, very interested in trying to help veterans who had become homeless. And he was talking about charities that target them, and he was going around and talking to them. And yet, he was himself very close to becoming homeless because he can't. It's very hard for him to. Now, the injuries that he have don't make it impossible to work. There are conceivable jobs you could do, but the number of things he can do, the number of occupations that he can function in, is vastly reduced from what a normal person could do. Vastly reduced, and even ignoring his physical problems, even if they could be cured somehow or he didn't have them, just the psychological injuries are such that it makes him very difficult to be employed. Now I said, well, I know a lot of businesses will hire, they'll actually hire vets. And he goes, no, they will not hire combat vets. And I have worked with combat vets before at, let's say, Burger King. I had one in college who had been to Iraq, and he could not be a good employee because he sometimes couldn't drive to work because he was worried that the thing of garbage was going to blow up, or he just couldn't get out of bed. And they were philanthropic enough to let it slide, but on the other hand, you can only let it slide for a certain amount of a wage. Okay, so this guy, they're never going to trust him with, say, a management position or a higher management position. A firm, any kind of job that requires more responsibility. I mean, anything that's going to pay a high remuneration, they're going to have things like responsibility and reliability, and these are qualities that now have been really reduced in him. And so, yeah, he can maybe be allowed to have a job making whatever minimum wage is or something, and there's stuff you can do with that's not an existence that is pointless, but it's greatly reduced from what potentially he could have done in other circumstances. And this is, I think, pretty common. It's not necessarily true with everybody, but it's pretty common. Now, and I asked my friend if he joined, if he was involved in any groups, and well, I'll come to this in a little bit. But anyway, so we talked in like March, and he was hurt. He was hurting bad, and it was weird because we were talking about homeless people, but he could see himself, he could see his own future in these guys, and there's not really anything I could do about it. We were kind of friends and we talk about it, but I mean, what am I supposed to do? So we stopped talking, not because no acrimonious reasons, just our dialogue phased out, which is real common with me. It's real common with people that at remote distances, to have a couple conversations and then kind of it ebbs and flows and waxes and wanes, and it is what it is. So last month, a little bit less than a month ago now, I was at work, and everything's going great. My job is kind of developing in a way that I hadn't really foreseen, and it's not bad. It's good that things have changed, and and I'm wondering what to do with all the money I'm making, and very much I'm very, not that these problems don't keep me up at night or make me think, but like I'm very much aware these are like so-called first world problems or higher order of needs on Maslow's pyramid. Anyway, he sends me a text that he'd really like to talk. Seemed very out of the blue. It'd been something like 5-6 months since we had had any kind of conversation or talk, but whatever. He texted like once or twice in the course of a day, and there was a certain eagerness that I didn't understand, but it didn't matter. I thought maybe he had something fun to tell me. Maybe he had a boyfriend or something like that. That had usually been what we talked about. And so I actually went to bed one night, and around 10 or 11 he called me, and we started chatting, and it was, oh, how you doing, and all that. And lo and behold, he had become homeless. He was living at another vet's home who was actually in worse shape than him. No job, no money. His conditions had become worse. He had begun psychological therapy for his PTSD, which sounded like torture. Basically, they said the therapy is they figure out what your triggers are, whatever it is that makes you go ballistic, and then they just subject you to it constantly for like hours and hours and hours and hours. Apparently, this is to, I don't know, beat it out of you psychologically. I'm not sure. I'm not a psychiatrist. I have no idea if this is actually a good thing or not or what. But the treatments called for a certain number of sessions, and after they did about you know, some small fraction of that, they just said, you know, we're overstaffed, we can't do them anymore, and they just kicked him out. So, you know, so he was in a really bad place. And as we talked, you know, he's like, you're a really nice guy, you're a really good guy. And then he says, it's too bad that we never got a chance to meet. And that's when I kind of got clued in. This was not exactly just a, hey, how's it going phone call. This was goodbye phone call, which I have not had a goodbye phone call before. And it was, I chose my words very carefully. And I kind of said, what is this, you know, it sounds like you've come to some final decisions about this. By the way, we had discussed this topic, and rather than beat around the bush, we discussed suicide earlier. And he had taken the attitude that I had said, look, suicide, it's moral. I mean, there's nothing, I can't say it's wrong for someone to kill themselves if you own yourself, and ultimately if you want to end your life, you can. Just it doesn't offer you anything unless you have a strong belief in an afterlife, and indeed in a positive afterlife. It just offers you oblivion, and that's literally nothing. So why would you, you know, I can't imagine. People kind of debate death. I was just reading in the book on, well, it doesn't matter, but you know, one guy said fearing death is akin to fearing falling asleep, except you never wake up from death, and you do have the prospect of waking up from your sleep, although hypothetically you could die in your sleep. Anyway, when we had spoken earlier, he had agreed with that and said, you're right, you know, it's only oblivion, and ultimately that's a no-go. Well, in the last couple months had been really rough, and he had changed his mind about that. He said he doesn't belong in this world, that he does not fit in this world anymore, that he can't get along in this world, that all the world offers him is pain and suffering, and psychological torment. You know, the nightmares make it so he can't sleep, and physical pains that never go away. And also, it'd be one thing if these things could be treated, but the thing is, there's not much promise in what can and cannot be treated. Maybe some of the conditions can be alleviated some, but they can't be, it's unlikely that they'll be eliminated or reduced that much. And he's just looking, look, this is going to be my life forever, a debilitating existence, and he's completely alienated. He does, and the thing is, I was like, well, can't you, you're not the only person like this. There are other, you know, I can empathize, but there's only so much that I can identify with you, and we know this, you know. And I said, can't you go and talk to other people? I know you're not the only one like this. And he goes, I know it too, and I've gone to those groups. And you know what? We started a group, and within 4 or 5 months, half the group would be dead. They would have killed themselves. So it was almost like the thing to do. I mean, he doesn't. It's so bad for him that he wants to kill himself. He'd already decided he had to figure out where he was going to do it, what he was going to use. He already had the gun. He knew exactly. He picked the date. The date was significant. He has to say in some kind of traumatic injury on that date at some point in the past, and he basically felt like he should have just. It would have been better if he had died then, well, as opposed to have lived in the intervening, I don't even know how many years. And he was going to kill himself, I think, later that week. So I mean, I didn't want him to kill himself. I wasn't going to blame myself. I knew that nothing that had happened was my fault, which I told him that. I said, okay, I'm not going to guilt you into not doing something. And I'm not going to tell you that it's wrong to commit suicide, because I don't believe that. But what I'm going to tell you is that your perspective is fucked up, and that it might make sense right now, and there is a certain logic to what you're saying, but you're looking at it from the point of view of somebody who's just had all this bad stuff happen to you. You're probably depressed, and that you don't know everything, and there could be treatments available at some point. You could improve. You know, your situation is bound to change one way or the other, which of course is terrifying in the sense that it could become worse, but it could become better. And there's as realistic and hard-nosed as you are, and as I'm, you know, prone to be myself, you don't know all ends. I even quoted Gandalf. So even the very wise do not know all ends, and you know, this is a final step. This is an irrevocable step that you're taking, and to do that, I think you have to have a degree of certainty that you just don't have. And I don't know how close he really was to doing it. He sounded pretty serious. He was in a really bad place. Statistically, so many of them do it that it's hard to discount the probability. I don't know how much. Actually, I think he was going to do it like the next day, actually. He didn't. He contacted me the next day and he said, thank you for talking to me. I didn't mean to put that on you," which he wasn't really putting it on me. It was a little awkward because my coworker kind of barged in and had some question about like the gas readings, and I was like, really, this is not a good time. Uh, and then I had to go talk to him later and be like, "I'm sorry, I didn't want to be short with you, but this what was happening with this guy was going to take precedence over, you know, the minutia of work for right then." Um, but yeah, he's not he's alive still, as far as I know. We've talked a couple times since then, and he didn't kill himself. But one thing he mentioned is he says nobody cares, nobody nobody understands, nobody appreciates, and nobody thinks about it. And one thing that he said he liked about me is that I was obviously like aware of this. Now I can't viscerally, emotionally like accept it's the whole Dunbar numbers, everything. It's not the same as if like it happened to me or somebody very close to me. Like it's more theoretical than that, but I can still, you know, at least tell him that I understand that this is something that's really terrible going on, and that he was fucked by the government. You know, this is not a libertarian guy. This guy did not approach me because he's a libertarian or anything like that. Now, one thing that kind of allowed him to cope with it is because he believed all the bullshit about we're making the country safe, we're, you know, like we're making, you know, we're performing some function that is necessary, that even if it's ugly and dirty and vile and has all these negative consequences, it's necessary. It has to be done. You know, it has to be done or else something terrible. And over the years, not because of my influence, but just because probably his own cynicism, or realism rather, you know, he decided in a very kind of Smedley Butler-esque way that that was bullshit. That even if there hypothetically is some justification for military or armed forces, you know, without, you know, talking about statism or anarchism generally, that his deployment to these areas, the way he was utilized in these areas, it's not conforming to any kind of Benthamite notion of the most good for the most people or what's defending the country. That it's a very kind of blasé use of political power by a political class for political ends that are not linked to the well-being of the people or anything even remotely like that. And without that kind of ethical justification, it became unjustified, and that I think really I mean, it was like the last straw kind of thing. I don't know if that's the exact sequence, but that realization took a huge toll. And that's the thing is, he said, like all these young guys, they don't believe it. They think that they're going out there to be heroes and to whatever, you know, whatever the bullshit is. It's hard for me to even relate because I'm so past believing in it any longer. But it's the tragedy is so many people still do, and it still resonates with them. You know, they see the flag and the eagle and the excitement, and it resonates. And then the mass of the people, you know, he goes, these people, they don't see me, you know, I believe that I did this socially great thing, but then the people on the street that I thought that I did it for looked at me as just another homeless loser. And you know, they don't care, they don't even want to think about what I suffered through. They don't even want to acknowledge that it happened. It's so out of people's minds. It's crazy. It's crazy how these wars are so out of people's minds. They don't care. They do not care. It's funny how, and this is, I mean, it's glaringly contradictory when we're talking to say about conservatives who are warmongers and who are nationalists, which by the way is slowly changing. But like, you know, we've got these real cheerleaders on the sides, but then that we're confronted with this. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of them who say, "Oh no, he's been treated wrong, and he should be treated. You know, our veterans should get all this great treatment." But the fact is, they don't. There's only so much treatment you can do for somebody who's had a problem like this, and if you're gonna subject people to this, and this is without like going into the things that they have done. You know, this is without even analyzing the effects that they cause, which, from as far as I can tell, are probably a lot worse than what's inflicted. You know, you better have a really, really, really good reason, and there just isn't one. They're just not a good reason. It's just so shrug and flippant and whatever. It makes me feel good. It's funny, yeah. Even the conservatives will be emotional. It makes me feel patriotic. Just the idea of vengeance, essentially, or nationalism. Of just, oh, we're asserting how badass. Fuck yeah, America. Fuck yeah. Like, it's a joke, right? It's a puppet show that Matt and Trey did a great movie about. Except for this. Except then we have people who are killing themselves. You know, and the guy I talked to ended up not yet, anyway. But lots of them do. A lot of them do. Like, what is it? It's more than to get killed in the actual combat. You know, imagine how fucked up you have to be for a young man to do that. It's understandable, you know, like a terminally ill cancer patient, or, you know, you have a spouse that's maybe married 50 or 60 years and their husband or their wife dies, and so, okay, that's sad, but, like, it's also sort of makes sense. Like, there's a certain, like, natural ebb to that. But, like, you take somebody who's in the prime of their life, still a kid, still young, like, their body is still, even their body and their mind is not to reach the fullness of their manhood, and they get fucking sucked into this machine. It's a bureaucracy, and they get put into a mold and just stamped and injected and subjected and to all this conditioning. Not all of which has negative consequences, not 100%, but a lot of it does. And then they get shipped off, and, you know, like I said, it's not like all of them get completely ruined. It's not like every egg breaks, you know, but a lot of them do, and it's like, why, like, what was worth this guy's suffering? This guy's suffering times 100,000, a million. I mean, it's hard to kind of quantify, you know, injuries. Like, well, okay, he has it bad, but what about the guy who, you know, just broke his arm, or what about the guy who all his flesh is melted off and he's covered in a scar? We've seen those. Go look at pictures of the you know, 20, 22, 23-year-old guys, you know, their wedding pictures, and they fucking look like some monster because their flesh is all scarred everywhere. It's a miracle they're not dead. You know, and you can just see their wife trying to smile because it's really horrible, because it's horrific, because it's absolutely ghastly. And that we would go and just la-di-da, everything's fine, everything's fine, I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote for one of the two parties that both support this all the way, 100%. I voted for the one, I'm rhetorically against this, and I voted for the guy I perceive to also be rhetorically against this. But he's not, because he supports it. It keeps happening. This is a story that is repeating itself many times every day, continually, right now. And why? I mean, what are we getting that's worth this? What is anybody getting that is worth this price? And what's even worse, I think, is it's one thing to, like, get your math wrong, right? It's one thing if somebody, I mean, there are probably neocons who have done this, and I almost will give them credit for this, because they might actually go and say, you're right, I fully acknowledge all these terrible things, all these costs, they happen, it's part of the price. I accept that, and I've looked at the counter, you know, the alternative, and I think the alternative is worse, and so I still think it's justifiable. I disagree. At least they did the math. Most proponents, and most of the acceptance is passive and tacit, they don't even do that. It's just oh well, it makes me feel good. I don't think about the guys committing suicide. I don't think about the money. I mean, we haven't even touched on that, but like the money actually is hugely important. The rise in the cost of living is going to hurt who the most? Right, the rich, right? No, the poor, but whatever. Not important. Somebody like that who is in favor of something without even thinking about its cost or even caring. You point it out, it's like whatever. I don't know how many times I pointed this out to people, and it's like whatever. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel good because you don't want to think about what it costs. Like that to me, I can't accept. I can't respect that. I have to look at somebody like that and just draw all extremely negative, pejorative conclusions. And it's one thing to be ignorant and not know, and many of them are. But if to favor something that you're acknowledging that you're ignorant about is, I mean, it says a lot about you. Also, it's not hard to not be ignorant about this. This is not something, even if you had never been contacted by somebody who had these experiences who's going to relay them to you, it's out there. Now, the media, just on a side note, the media is complicit as fuck in all of this because they won't show the gore. And which is an element. Look, like I said, war is not all pure gore all the time. It's not. But they don't show that element. They won't show the bodies. They won't show the damage. They sanitize it and they give people this false idea that war. This is the genius. I don't know what somebody in the Pentagon that Vietnam was a big disaster for the government. 1970s were a big disaster for the government in a lot of ways. And they said, what we need is a good war. We need a war that people get behind. And I think the kind of test case was the first Gulf War, and like that war it wasn't blood and gore. It wasn't the highway of death in Basra where you see all these bodies that have been charcoaled as they scream in agony. And it wasn't the Gulf War syndrome where you have all this probably exposure to depleted uranium or whatever else it was that's causing cancer and whatever. It's not that. It's an image of a building in an infrared or a night vision goggle, and it's this precision munition going and blowing up like the bad guys, blowing up this aggressive foreign Arab tank that's going to threaten America's values by invading another Arab country that has a monarchy and blah 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 blah. Like, it was very, very effective, and the media, like, I don't know if they were threatened or if it's just part of their incentive structure or both. It doesn't matter either way. Like, they won't show it. They won't even kind of reference it. They'll condemn anybody who does show it or talk about it. They actually put it as a thing of pride that they don't show these things. And so, yeah, you don't get what was it? The very famous video in Vietnam where some South Vietnamese general, it wasn't even an American, executed a guy on the street, shot him in the head, and was gushing blood out right on the street during the Tet Offensive, I think. Yeah, a lot of people saw that and were like, oh, fuck. Really? Really? Well, they don't see that now. They don't see that now. When they come across some homeless vet on the street, they just assume, well, he's just some alcoholic drunk, and no, sometimes that's true. Like, or sometimes they got completely ruined in this policy, in this war, that they just, I don't know, it's not a big deal. It's just not a big deal to them. That's what I think this was really got to the guy. It's not a big deal. He's completely destroyed his life. Even if he comes through it, he's going to be missing this whole gap that he had to suffer through. And it's like, oh, well, whatever. Like, people look at, like, Shawshank Redemption, like, oh, no, that poor guy, he spent 20 years in prison. Like, yeah, that sucks. For an innocent, he didn't do anything, and, like, not a perfect analogy for a couple reasons, but this is even worse. I mean, he tortured, destroyed, mentally, and it's like, I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. I'm going to vote for Obama. He's great. Obama, 2016, I hope he gets reelected again for a third term. Or Bush, or whatever. It's sick. So, like, we can have a debate about the costs of war. But if you're going to ignore the costs and you're going to have a debate where you frame it in a way that the price is not figured into the cost, that the negative effects don't matter, that you don't care. You know, when the government kills somebody, you don't care. Corporation is rude to somebody and it's the end of the world. But if they vaporize somebody or lobotomize somebody or toast somebody or poison them or imprison them or whatever, that doesn't matter. I don't care about that. Like, I mean, if you're somebody who prides yourself on moral justice and social justice and all that, then go fuck yourself. If you're more of a nationalist type and you think this is like somehow in the national interest, can you explain why is it worth the price? And I'm not even looking at like the foreign people, the foreigners whose bodies and lives are destroyed. We could, and that's a totally legitimate place to go. But there's so much carnage to go around that you can focus on just this one little thing. So I don't know what to do for this guy. I don't know that there's much I can do, and I told him that. I said, I don't know what do you want me to do? I can't undo the damage. He wasn't pleading or anything. He was really calling to say goodbye. He was just, and I said, of all, you don't know anyone. We barely know each other. We've talked. We've been intimate in the sense that we'll talk to each other about things that are close to us, but we've never actually met. We didn't grow up. We're not buddies together, and who else are you going to talk to? It's like, he has, I don't know. It's not good. So, and the thing is, even these good wars, Vietnam and this, World War II, World War I, you're kidding yourself if you don't believe those weren't every bit as terrible or more. Every bit. And actually the John Dennison stuff is great. And they even interviewed Eugene Sledge, who, if you don't know, is the guy who wrote With the Old Breed, and whose character is the main character in the HBO series The Pacific. It's from his kind of point of view. And, he kind of had very similar sentiments that these guys, these soldiers, their lives are altered, usually for the worst. Not always, usually for the worst, though. And they just we kind of forget about it, and it gets swept under the table, and like my friends I know, they put on a happy face and they come out and they meet their friends or whatever, but I know when they go, I mean, not to get too personal, but I know that when they go home and they go to bed, it's not all sunshine and roses, and that's never going to end. It's never going to end. Like the guy who, The Flags to Our Fathers, well, this is a good movie, by the way, Flags to Our Fathers. Flags of Our Fathers. It shows these like 70, 80-year-old men who are waking up, panicking, just terrified and in the fetal position, and stuff that happened 50, 60, 70 years before is still with them. Not to mention the financial cost. The states are still paying out. This is crazy. The states are still paying out payments to Civil War veterans. All Civil Wars. The last Civil War veteran died in 1959, probably. But they give benefits to their widows, and there's a couple of them who got married when they were really old, and now their spouses are really, really old. And I don't know. It might be fraud at this point, but like you're still not to say that monetary expenses are equivalent to human suffering, because they're not. But they linger on, and we've already. It's funny because we'll already write the history book that says the war was justified, and we don't even know what it really cost yet. Like people were writing glorious histories of World War II, and there were still people who hadn't died of their wounds yet, who were yet to die of their wounds. And then there are people who spent the next decades, some of them to this day, who suffered and still suffer. So how can you say it was justified when you don't even know what it cost? You don't even know what the full measure, was. And they don't. That's the thing, is you can't know that. But then it doesn't matter. They'll just make the claim anyway. They'll just say it was worth it. They won't even question. Of course, it was worth it. No, how could you doubt? Well, because I think, because I have a brain. That's why. So anyway, a day that will live in infamy forever and ever and ever. And there's a whole other issue here. I'm sure someone's going to say it, and I can't argue. They volunteered. They did bad things. They get what's coming to them. I understand. I understand those arguments, and I'm not refuting them here because, it's more complicated than that, though. You have people who are conditioned to view it in a different way. They don't see it as murder. They don't see it as atrocious. They see it as heroic. They see it as what they should do. And, that's not going to make me condone it or anything, but I do empathize with it a little bit more than I might in a purely theoretical way. So, anyway, I don't want to end on a happy note, but yeah, it is a date that will live in infamy forever, and the costs of war are exceedingly high.